Hello, everybody. My name is Francisco Carrasco, and I'm here with a very, very good friend and brother, Eugene Skeef, who I will be in conversation with. This is part of the Luma Creations in Conversation with series. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Eugene before we start. Eugene is a South African percussionist, composer, poet, educationally, and animateur. He's lived in London since 1980. He has worked in so many different contexts, including conflict resolution, cultural development, creative leadership. He's been a broadcaster and done so much more. I met Eugene in the early 90s. And one of the things that struck for me was how Eugene's roots have always been firmly established in his cultural work, which he did with Steve Biko, the late South African civil rights leader, as a young activist, when he co-led a national literacy campaign, teaching schools, colleges, and communities across apartheid South Africa. Eugene has been at the forefront of contemporary music scene across the UK, and has worked in many, many programs and projects with major classical orchestras and various other. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and he has served on the board of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, Sound Junction, at the Associate Board of the Royal Schools of Music, and he has been a judge at the BBC Choir of the Year. Now, those are all great things he's done, but for me, Eugene is a personal friend, and there's a lot of different things that we have worked together with. I've known him in so many capacities. In 2006, he was awarded the Arts Council Fellowship to go to Banff Arts Centre in Canada, where he spent 3 months developing In Memory of Our Seasons, a multimedia commission for the London Sinfonietta. He directed Motherland in 2007, which was a dance theatre piece he created with an international cast in acknowledgement of the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act. I could carry on for ages talking about all the different things he has done. I met Eugene in the early 90s when he was director of the Oval House Music School in London, and where he was based for several years. And I brought him to Liverpool to deliver music workshops for the inaugural Africa Our Year Festival in 1992, where he ended up as the launch performance of the first Africa Our Year Festival. Now, Africa Our Year Festival is known as the biggest free African music festival in Europe. And, you know, it would be Eugene who did the first performance with a couple of other artists, friends. In 1995, we traveled to South Africa as part of the Ngoma project, which Eugene created from a wish to take a group of world artists to his beloved homeland. You know, Eugene, you've been everywhere, done so many things. Some of the work you've done in conflict resolution, in situations of war and everything is incredibly powerful. And to me, you are, you know, one of my dearest friends, my dearest brother. So now I have some questions for you, and only because I think it's really important for people to know about you and know the work you do and share, because it makes a difference, consistently makes a difference. So tell me, Eugene, you have traveled far and done many things, both in South Africa and once you had to leave around the world. Can you tell me a little bit about your time in South Africa's apartheid years?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you, my beautiful and respected Chilean brother, Francisco Carrasco. Thanks for introducing me in such a warm and heartfelt way. You make me feel a positive sense of pride, not the negative pride. You know, I feel proud to be who you describe me as, you know, because sometimes, because I don't have all those notions in the forefront of my head. Sometimes I sort of casually forget about that. So you've made me really feel good about myself, and as I say, in a positive sense. So thanks for that. I grew up in a part of South Africa on the outskirts of Durban town by the Indian Ocean on the eastern coast of Africa, South Africa. So I grew up in Claremont Township, which, as I say, was a satellite of the city of Durban. In Claremont, my particular area was referred to as Indunduma. And for me, I like to think that Indunduma is an idiophonic reflection of the thundering hills. There was a lot of rain, beautiful rain. Frogs rained out of the sky for real, and termites would come out when it rained, sometimes just before the rain, and then during the rain, and after the rain, they would stay. And as a kid, running naked in the streets, my main road was called Main Avenue. And it was the main sort of stream of traffic, pedestrians and cars throughout the day. And then even at night with the Shembe people, who would chant and drum with their white robes and green sashes. And there'd be one drummer, and they would chant spiritual chants and travel along the Main Avenue at night in the moonlight, under the moon. And I would jump out of my bedroom window and steal past my mother's bedroom window because I wanted to join them as a boy, because they were so, they mesmerized me. This is nighttime in the moonlight. And I think those were the seeds, the first seeds of me being into running workshops and using rhythm, was those people, their drumming, But in the daytime, I'd be playing in the streets with other kids, and we would venture into nature. Just literally a spitting distance from my home was the most verdant, green forests and vegetation generally, where fruits and vegetables, sweet potatoes, potatoes, carrots, green beans, peas, bananas, mangoes, guavas would just be growing free. No one would own them. And so even though we grew up in poverty in the Black Township during apartheid and experiencing the violence of the police and the Afrikaners and the state, the agents of the racist regime, the forests and nature, if you like, the environment, were our refuge. That's where we got our freedom, our peace. So I spent a lot of time swimming in the most beautiful, clean rivers, where you could see the fish. You look through the water, you can see the fish because the water was clear and not muddy and not murky, and we would just pluck mangoes. I was one of the best ones at climbing trees to get the mangoes. And I remember on our way to school, to primary school, there'd be the areas where mangoes and avocados and guavas and pawpaws and all these beautiful fruits grew freely. And as I say, nobody owned the land, because in our tradition, in pre-colonial times, our people, the African people, were custodians of the natural environment. They were stewards of the natural environment. You didn't own the nature. You didn't own trees. You didn't own bananas. They were part of you. You were part of them. We weren't like, what's his name? I'm forgetting the English guy. It'll come. Anyway, it'll come back to me. Darwin. The Darwinian concept of like humans on top of the chain. The chain of command, if you like. We are up there, and the rest of the animal kingdom, if you like, is down there. With our people, we were all equal and part of the same circle. So, but during apartheid, the white colonial oppressor started putting fences, around tracts of land, which were our free grazing lands. And they would build communities, their suburbs there, So, and put sharp fences with barbed wire, to keep us out. So inside those fences, on the inside, were the same guavas and mangoes and pawpaws and avocados that we knew to be our friends, if you like, So I was the most relied upon to climb over the fence. I used to hold the record as the highest jumper, in the region as a young man. So I used that to good purpose, get over the fence and climb the tree quickly, pick mangoes and guavas and avocados or whatever, throw them over the fence. Our sisters would pull up the skirts of their gym dresses. They would hold the bottom part and use that to collect all the mangoes and guavas and avos, and I'd jump back over the fence before the dog that was there, guarding the white man's stolen property, our stuff, So that was my experience of my childhood, a lot of fun, on the street, going to school and what have you, And so my health, the same health that I have now, which I don't take for granted, and the smoothies that I make using, mangoes and bananas and fruits from Bolivia and Colombia and Chile and Argentina and Brazil and South Africa, I was eating that fruit, as a kid for free, and that's my gratitude in terms of the kind of health that my mother cultivated in us is from that. But my father and mother's home in that same township was a place that was a refuge for all the children from families that were broken, either because of a drug-taking father or a father who was beating up his wife. Children from those kind of families that were broken would end up in our home. Because my mother was a midwife and a herbal healer using African herbs, but also a health visitor of the Western kind. And my father was the strongest man in the township. So our home was the safest. So again, my workshops, when just to fast forward, in the 90s, when my workshops were popular in the UK, Arts Council England used to refer to my kitchen, where you've been, Francisco, and played your guitar, and you've seen Begim Selegu there, and we've sung. My kitchen used to be called Eugene's Kitchen by Arts Council England. But really, when they were saying my kitchen, Eugene's Kitchen, what they were really referring to, they didn't know, and I had to educate them about it, was that my kitchen in the UK was a new sort of a modulation, if you like, a harmonic shifting, like a chord shift of my mother's kitchen, because my mother's home, my kitchen in that same township was where food was cooked and people were fed for free, and tea was boiled, and brewed, and people were given for free. And that's where all the conversations happened, and people felt safe. So that when I then later met Steve Biko as a student in the 70s, and we started working together, I was doing with Steve Biko. I brought to the Black consciousness movement what I had already experienced as a child. My sense of community and Ubuntu. I'm a person. I am through you because I am because you are. That human, the concept of compassion. And human empathy, which is part of our culture. But I'm saying I lived that in my mother's and father's yard, So that was my, that was my growing up, if you like. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. The concept of the kitchen, as you say, as the place of community, the place of safety where you can be yourself, was very much what I experienced when I was in your kitchen, and it really did take me back to. It's very funny because it takes back to my mother's place, because that's why I felt so at home, because that's how we grew up. There was always instruments, there was always conversation, there was always discussion, learning, creating. When you met Steve Biko, where did you go to study? Where were you?
Okay, I went to university a couple of times. I started in the very early 70s. I actually don't even remember the year, maybe 71 or something like that.
Mm.
I went to the University of Western Cape, which is in Belleville on the fringes of Cape Town.
Right.
And I intended to study a Bachelor of Science degree. And the reason for I started with that, but I need to just go back a little bit. How I ended up there was because I was quite a bright student in my secondary school, in my high school years. I was one of the top students. It was topped in the class. I was very good at mathematics. I was one of the top, maths students, and I was interested in science. Even though I always, knew that I would end up being an artist. Creativity was my thing, but maths is creative. And the separation between science and arts is more Western issue than it is ours. Because in Africa we have a holistic view of the world, and all the creative forms are molded together. They're like one dreadlock. They're not taken apart. It's in the West where it was once like that, and the story. With Christianity and all that, and then eventually industrialization. Things shifted. You've got this compartmentalized view of the world. But going back to my high school days, I was this bright student, and my dad, who didn't really like school, who wasn't crazy about school. He wanted us to work the land and be creative because we were poor, and he was resourceful and had ways of making ends meet. He was incredibly resourceful. He'd recycle copper wire and stuff like that. Until he became quite wealthy, and then bought all these huge cars in cash, which I started driving at 9 years old, and that's how I became the getaway driver for the Black Consciousness movement. I became Steve Biko's driver in my 20s, and the skills that I used when we were getting away from the special branch, the agents of the racist regime, the apartheid regime, those were the skills I was using. But so my dad, knowing that I had an acumen for the sciences, forced me to become a doctor. He just imposed that vision, like parents do, like I'm or the old school parents, I don't think I'm like that, but with all due respect to my dad, he wanted me to be a doctor. And the reason that in our parts of the world, and I think it's the same for you, where you come from as well, but it's the same in Pakistan and India, in all our cultural backgrounds, those places that ended up being colonized, there are three professions that are seen by our parents as a route out of poverty, the cycle of poverty. It's accountancy, law, and medicine. So then so it's like my thing was, my dad wanted me to become a doctor, and of course I didn't really want to become a doctor. So I started by doing a BSc, with botany, zoology, chemistry, and psychology. I think is one of the subjects I studied. And then that was going to be like a degree leading me into medical school in Durban, where Steve Biko was, to do the degree MBCHB, to become a doctor. Things happened though that I didn't finish my degree, and then I left, went back to Durban. I was naughty. Then I didn't stay at home, and then I went to the medical school, but I wasn't really I wasn't fulfilling the dream of my father and studying. I was hanging out there, and then I stayed with my friends. I lived close to Ben Langa, who was assassinated some years ago, who was my friend with Steve Biko, and we were all living at the Alan Taylor residence in Wentworth, which I think we also showed you, near the oil refinery, the British Petroleum Oil Refinery. And that was the black section of what was then called Natal University, the medical school. So the black students, the black medical students, didn't live on campus. We had to live miles away and travel on rickety, buses with wooden seats, and go to Alan Taylor, which had a 24/7 military presence at the gate with a Saracen. I remember that clearly. And someone just, I thought I'd forgotten about it, and someone just, corrected me and reminded me that I was right in remembering that. So there'd be a presence of soldiers standing armed with a Saracen at the gate what used to be a barracks, you know, before it was our residence, with
Right.
low roofs, asbestos, corrugated asbestos roof, very unhealthy, no ceilings, you know, and brick walls, you know. So that's where I met Steve Biko. And then in 1973, I remember this distinctly, after he gave a fantastic speech in the hall, we went on a tour where I was driving Steve Biko with other people like Bogwe Mafuna, Harry Nengwekulu, Ben Langa, going to do tours of the Black universities throughout South Africa, you know. And that's when some of the literacy training started as well, you know, where I remember, and I've told you this before, where, for instance, I was in Cape Town one time with Steve Biko. And while Steve Biko was at a high-powered meeting, I was using my finger and sometimes a little twig from a tree, doing maths and poetry in the sand, in Langa and Kukuletu, you know, Nyanga, those townships, you know. And those are my earliest memories of actually of teaching in the sand, because we had no papers, and pens, you know. So it was all improvisation, creativity, very much the same kind of improvisation that you and Marcina and I did in Liverpool when we did our beautiful, you know, performance themed on the river of humanity.
So after all that, when you found yourself in London in 1980, what was it like for you? You know, you arrived in London 1980.
Yes.
What did you find? Did you have expectations? What do you think, and how did you deal with those early years?
Okay, first there's a lead up to the arrival in 1980.
Yeah.
So I arrived in July in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at you know, those white cliffs of Dover, and you know, and the coach drove all the way to London. But before all of that, in June 1980, I left hurriedly, where my passport that had been taken by the apartheid regime, by the special branch, was returned for me. I used a Jewish, like the equivalent of what we used to call law centers in the UK,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
A similar situation. The kind of people who were lawyers who were sympathetic to our cause. You know, this firm happened to be a white Jewish firm, and they intervened on my behalf and got my passport back. And instantly, my ex-wife Mary, who you know, Mary Edwards, and I prepared, got a ticket, and I had been living with her in hiding in a little community, like an alternative community. And Begim Selegu, the great Begim Selegu, the great composer, pianist, you know, saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, who owned the mouthpiece of John Coltrane, given to him by John Coltrane's wife, Alice Coltrane, you know, when Beggy went to New York in '77 with Malombo, the group Malombo. Begim Selegu was visiting us a lot at our place with Mary Edwards in this hidden place, and sometimes with his ex-wife, Nomvula Ndlazulwane, when she was very young, the pianist. And when he knew we were about to leave, literally on the day we were leaving, he just refused to be left behind. That's how close we were. And instantly, Mary bought Begim Selegu a ticket, literally on the day that we were leaving. I don't think I ever told you that. And
No.
at Beggy, we were all got on the plane, and we took a flight. And our first, our flight was via Switzerland, where one of Mary's younger sisters was living, was a hippie artist and a beautiful person, Marcel Edwards. She was living with a guy on a farm in Switzerland. You know, there were these alternative, environmentally sound type, you know, hippies and what have you. And so we went via, oh gosh, what's the landlocked place now? Oh, gosh, my memory. It will come back to me. This landlocked country where we had to go via there and then go on a train from there to a part of to Lausanne, and then we were met and then went to the farm. I'm just forgetting the place now, but it will come back to me. But anyway, there was a tower, a monument that was erected in honor of the local people who fought on behalf of the Allied forces against the Germans,
Right.
and during the war. And Begi took out his saxophone and attached the John Coltrane mouthpiece, his tenor saxophone, and did a solo, a tenor saxophone solo in the presence of the monument, and people gathered and they were just blown away, and he blew and he blew and he blew, and it was phenomenal. Then we stayed on the farm and we'd get up and play flutes and he'd practice, we'd play their guitars and what have you. And we went via Munich. We met Abdullah Ibrahim, the great South African pianist. He was, we stayed with Mary's friends in Munich, Uli and Bohini, a German and Swazi couple. And then we went to see Abdullah Ibrahim, and Abdullah Ibrahim advised Begim Selego to take his asylum in Sweden, because there were already some South Africans like Johnny Diani and the bassist, and Gilbert Matthews, the drummer who Begi had performed with in South Africa, and that life would be better there for him. And then Mary and I continued on to London. So we were in this bus, from Dover all the way to London, and I enjoyed the countryside and what have you. But as we got closer to London, as we got, to the suburbs and the fringes of London, I was amazed by, I was shocked to see so many boarded up buildings. It was great and stuff, but there were these boarded buildings, a lot of properties boarded up, and I'm thinking, what's this about, And then we went and I connected with friends of our friends in Johannesburg who had given me a parcel to take, like they'd knitted a jersey for this family who were left-wing, like Marxist, socialist types, white South Africans who had fled South Africa, and then they were living in Whitechapel and Bow and that kind of area in the east of London. So they received us, and we were happy to meet them. And then at some point, we needed to eat, so we walked to the club. We were told that there was a fish and chips place, a chippy, not far from where they were living. And I'd never heard these terms before, So we walked to the fish and chips place, man. And on our way there, and at the fish and chip place, white skinheads, racists, like, British Party types, your skinheads, were very racist towards me, calling me the N-word and what have you. And that was my first experience of that. I was used to the Afrikaners and what have you, and I dealt with that. And I thought I was coming to a place, where it was different and stuff. So that was my first, if you like, my first shock, like, good, that hit me in the face, where these people, treated me with profuse racism, The chips were nice and the fish was nice, I enjoyed that, but I didn't like that side of it. So that was my first, terrible experience, But from that, if I may continue, eventually we moved to Brixton, and then we stayed with some friends very near the 12 Tribes in Kennington in South London, where Bob Marley used to come. Where Bob Marley came when he came to perform here in London, and that's where he stayed. And there were these heavy rastas, very progressive guys and stuff, and they liked me because they knew about Steve Biko and Nelson Mandela and stuff, and so they welcomed us. They were welcoming me, if you like, as this black brother, who had been in the struggle, And then one thing led to another. We eventually got a flat in Brixton. But what I really want to talk about is that I had a bamboo flute, a transverse flute, and I used to walk around, because I did my yoga and meditation and chanting and what have you. So I used to get my liberation and feel free and feel at ease and at peace with myself, because the coldness, the human coldness in London was something I wasn't used to. We come from a background, a culture where everyone is warm, to everyone else, in the traditional African culture. But here it was different. And so one day I ended up at Oval House Theatre, and I was, dirt poor. And I used to play my Indian bamboo flute, and then I would go into Oval House, go to the kitchen, Oval House Theatre, and sit on one of the wooden tables that I can still remember as if it was just yesterday. And when I was tired of playing my flute, I would start doing my drumming techniques on the table, heel, heel palm, heel foot, whatever you call it, those like conga techniques, and do my paradiddles. And then I would be aware that I had to drum, even though I was practicing, I had to make my drumming seductive and beautiful, because I was sitting with people, I was near people who were eating and having a drink and stuff like that. And then these young guys would come from the estates, from the council estates, just across the road from Oval House. And they would harass people, The kitchen was run by gay men, and Oval House Theatre was very receptive, was a safe haven, if you like, for gay people. And so they ended up running the kitchen and cooking the food there that used to smell so nice. And I would be hungry and just wish for it, but I didn't have the money to buy the food. And these guys, would be offensive towards the gay guys, and then they'd run away, and then they'd go behind to the toilets and to the theater and do little naughty things and, pinch wires and microphones and what have you. But when they saw me playing the table, they stopped doing the naughty stuff and they came and gathered around the table. And they became my audience, and I played even more beautifully. And then eventually they would sit down. They would sit, they'd pull a chair and sit. And if there were not enough chairs, they'd grab a chair from elsewhere. And eventually I started involving them in the melodies and the rhythms. So we would all end up playing at the table, and I'd play my flute and we'd chant, and I'd create polyrhythms and harmonies and stuff. And one day, I arrived there, and the young kids went there, and one of the gay guys brought a plate piled high with Portuguese-style chicken, and then on the other side, another plate with a full green salad, healthy, beautiful food. And then the guy said, "Thank you," but I didn't know what he was talking about, and that was all. But obviously, he was referring to, I read between the lines later, and I understood that it was because of the kind of energy that I created when I came to the place. And then Alfie Pritchard, who then, in those days, used to run the youth workshops, youth theater and anything to do with young people. He was responsible for that, and they had funding from Lambeth, which is the council, that Oval House fell under. And so he came to me one day, and he used to dress nice, and he had his lovely scarves and his curly hair. And I remember, and he'd always pass there, and he used to see. So he'd watch this, and he says, "Hey, my friend, I'm so and so. What's your name?" And I introduced myself, and he says, "I've always seen you, with these young kids. I wonder if you'd like to do a workshop here, And we laugh about it to this day, he and I, because my eyes just popped, because the term workshop to me meant two things: a place where cars are fixed and panel beaten and stuff, And the second meaning is a very negative meaning. If during the struggle, our struggle with Steve Biko and the rest of us, if during the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, you were caught out, you were identified as an informer, as a collaborator, impi, selling out, as a sellout, you're selling out your people to the regime, taking information that would lead to, person being arrested or even, imprisoned or killed or whatever. You were then workshopped. So that was like a horrible thing, which meant you were physically reconstituted. So those were the two only things I knew workshop to mean. And then the guy laughed. He said, "No, I'm talking about," and then he explained what a workshop is. And in fact, just in parentheses quickly, when you got me that gig with Africa Oye, I have a quote that I still use that comes from that very event that you brought me to, where I ended up doing workshops in the community. Africa Oye, and I quote, says, "Eugene Skeef is probably the best workshop leader in the UK," or whatever. I say that, I'm happy to, I didn't say it. It was said, and I borrowed the quote where you guys were saying that. So I've ended up, at some point, I became the highest paid workshop leader in the UK. That's how high my status went. But the first ever workshop I did then, coming back to the story, was when I agreed to do workshops, and I started at Oval House. And that's what grew into Oval House Music School, where Tebili Pere, all the people you know, Begim Selegu, Mervyn Africa, ended up coming to teach. You know.
It's quite funny because this brings us straight into the next question I have, and it's about, you know, your belief in the power of creativity to heal. One of the things that you have done so much of. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the fact that you use that and you have been called upon to do that kind of work in places of conflict?
Thanks for asking that question. That's very close to my heart, as you know. In Africa, I'll start by giving the background. You know, I was born in South Africa. My entire consciousness was framed, you know, on the mother continent of Africa. You know, I'm a very proud African. You know, I've never, even for a split second, for a millionth of a second, ever had any hesitation or doubt as to my origins and my sense of pride and my sense of belonging. So I'm a child of this planet. I'm a child of this earth, but I'm a child of Africa, the source of humankind, you know, the headwaters of the long, endless river that traveled right across the planet and brought about, you know, the human, you know, population. I am from there. In Africa, in pre-colonial Africa, and it still happens now, but the source of it is before the white man came to do all the naughty stuff in Africa. In Africa, the arts, as I hinted earlier, were not separated. They were interwoven. They were like one dreadlock, you know? So music, dance, poetry, you know, sculpture, all of it was one. And there's a word which in fact you know very much because you and I were part of the whole creation with our other comrades and colleagues and friends and your brother Oscar as well. We created Ngoma, the Ngoma project. You know, we did the preparation in '94 and then we traveled and spent 3.5 months. Some people stayed on for longer, you know. We spent a long time in South Africa with the Ngoma project, spelled Ngoma, Ngoma. That word Ngoma is not only a Zulu word, it's not only a Xhosa word, it's a Nguni word, it's a Bantu word, it's a word of all the peoples, you know, of Southern Africa who came along that long route, you know, from other parts of Africa, way, way, way back, and settled there. The word Ngoma variously means all those things I've quoted, you know. It's anthem, it's song, it's music, it's dance, you know. But it is also divine healing energy. So really, I would actually not even need to even go any further because any, you know, person who is alert and who is awake and who knows themselves and who's conscious knows that. That means that in Africa, creative expression is equal to healing. So that when a poet or a musician or a dancer like Khadijatu, you know, or a lovely composer, musician, poet like you, Francisco Carrasco, like Begim Selegu, when he goes to the piano, who I listen to every day, and I wrote a poem for him this morning, you know, which is Mtombe, which is part of his clan or family adulations. Umtombo is a spring, wellspring. That is Begi's clan name. You know, he's a child from the wellspring, from the headwaters of the river, and the river courses through everything. So when a musician is alert and alive and conscious and aware, he or she is like a receptor, is like, you know, the image of the COVID-19 virus.
Yes.
That funny image, you know, it's this geophysical, this round thing with those, those like shoots, you know, those little outgrowths, you know, that are almost like coiled hair, you know, like flowers. Funny thing, you know. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, when a poet or a musician is aware, we are like that. We have, those are like our antennae, you know, those are our feelers. We can feel all the energy. So which means that when something or someone is out of alignment, a true creative person, a genuine one, not a fake, you know, false one who's a charlatan, a genuine one, and we know it. Like me, you know, I run away from being called, people have called me various things, like in Bosnia, where, you know, I worked for 2 years, where I was, you know, using my creativity to build bridges between the three factions that had, you know, were at war against each other, but also more importantly, to heal everybody, you know. I was using very much that, and they used to call me a healer, you know. People, I don't call myself that. That's one of my problems, maybe, of being a little shy about, especially in the West, where you know, where people are not used to singing their own praises. You know, we who gave rise to hip hop and stuff, we sing our praises, and that's not a negative. You know, in England they say, oh gosh, what's the expression? Remind me. There's a negative expression about praise anyway. You know, like self-praise is something or other. I'm forgetting the full, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But it's like it's negative to praise yourself. In Africa, we praise ourselves. We sing our praises, because if you don't know yourself and you don't love yourself, then you can't know and love anything else. You know, if you can't praise yourself, then you can't praise anybody else. So the artist, you know, the creative person, is the closest person to the alignment of being. You know, yeah. So
Yes.
humans, when the environment, even, that's why when we are born, you know, our umbilical cord is buried in the earth and a tree planted there, and wanton slaying of the tree is tantamount to suicide. And the best marimbas, that's an African word, you know, the classical marimbas, the marimbas everywhere else in Guatemala, the word marimba is mother of music. You know, mbira, kadimba, kalimba, timbila, those are African words, you know. So the marimba, the best marimba, is one that's made from a tree, a hardwood tree that is struck by lightning, which means that a human does not chop the tree down. It's nature that gives you the tree. So it exercises patience. Exercise patience. You wait until there's a gift from nature. That's how receptive we are. So we don't cut the tree because we are killing ourselves. And then when the tree gives us, when nature gives us the tree, we then carve it, and then we put the calabashes and the best gourds under the marimbas. You've seen them, you know, you played the marimba I owned, you know, which I brought to Liverpool at one stage, I think. The gourds, which are the resonators underneath each slat, you know, are the resonators, and they are tuned to the fundamental pitch of the wood. And those gourds, traditionally, the night before they are used, the eldest women, the elders, the healers, pee in them. They do their first pee, sorry, their last pee of the night before they go to sleep. They urinate in them, and that reinforces them, and, if you like, gives them a blessing and attunes them to a higher sort of level of receptivity. You know. So yes, we are the healers. You know, we create alignment. You know. But we cannot be arrogant about that, because that's a gift that comes, you know, from our ancestors, you know, yes. And we can feel it. Like Terby, you know, one of your close friends, you know, Terby, our percussionist who was with us in Goma, you know, where Terby, you know, just to finish the story, Terby suffered one time and nearly had, I don't know if you know the story, he had a little mild stroke on one side of his body when he was in Germany. I won't go too much into detail, but he did something that maybe he wasn't sure that he should have done. But eventually, when we went, in fact, he was healed when we went on the Goma trip, because Terby spoke to me privately, but he won't mind me telling you now because we can share this, is that Terby came to see me after that visit to Germany, and he wasn't right. And my ex-wife, Mary, and I, you know, we did some herbal things and we helped him and stuff, and he was okay. But what was happening was that Terby, you probably know this, had not been honoring the call to be a healer, to be a Sangoma. Do you know that about Terby? For years. Terby's a healer, you know that. You can see it in his eyes. You could feel the energy when we drummed, you know. You felt, in fact, when we performed with him once in Liverpool there through your invitation, and we did a whole thing where I found that the cassette tape of the gig, where he then talks to the audience and he's getting the audience I think you got someone to come and sit on stage or whatever. I don't remember all the details, but basically it was about alignment, to feel the vibration and stuff.
Yes, I remember when we were in Soweto, and he was finally made a sangoma, and we played all night.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the trip. So what I'm saying is, when one evades that calling,
Yes.
whether consciously or unconsciously, but worse, if you consciously run away from it for any reasons, most of which are to do with when we become westernized, and then we get confused about the whole thing of the pre-colonial and the post colonial.
It's funny because you're talking all this, and then 1,000 questions and thoughts come up. But I know that you have worked with some beautiful, amazing, great musicians, and you've been instrumental in many projects and developments throughout your time in the UK. Let's say, can you share something, that one of them, or something that kind of stands out to you of that kind of work that became a project, that became a development, and became the kind of work that you've done that's kind of planted seeds, but then grown into a tree and grown into a forest?
Yeah, let me just think, because there are many of them. I have to just pull out of. I'll have to go back, and using my childhood metaphor of those mango and apple trees, I'll have to pluck the salient fruit. Let me come at it back to front by my latest of all projects, my latest project, which is actually turning out to be almost one of my most powerful projects. Yet, in actual essence, in actuality, in its physical sense, it is my smallest project. But in that funny way that nature can do, that small seed can grow into becoming a baobab tree, a giant tree that heals and feeds an entire community, where people can actually live inside the tree. You've seen those images of the baobab, So it's my smallest project and my latest project, and it is this. I think you're aware that ever since the advent of COVID-19, or at least at the beginning of lockdown in the UK, I started writing a poem per day. So I've been writing a poem each day and every day since the beginning, of the pandemic. And you see them, I post them on all my social media, so they're there every day on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And I have to say, I feel sometimes I cry, I weep at the response that my poems, the responses that my poems are eliciting from people all over the planet. So here are two aspects, two P's, if you like, going back to the garden of my mother, where I used to pick the carrots and the peas and the beans and rinse them for my mother before she cooks them. And I used to eat most of them raw. So imagine a pea, peas in a pod. So there's this little pod that has twin peas inside, two round peas. So I'll tell you about these two P's that constitute my latest and smallest project. The one first is this. There's a woman called Sianed Jones. She's a Welsh woman. She's an incredibly gifted violinist, composer, singer, songwriter, Sianed Jones. She met me at Oval House. So in fact, my answer is now having a throwback to the very earliest, because she came to Oval House. So here am I talking about my latest projects as, being amongst my best in memory. And I was explaining to you, expressing my latest project as a partial apology because I felt stumped. But in fact, it's liberated me, because it's taken me to the source of when you knew that I was doing this work. So it takes me back to Oval House. She was one of my students at Oval House. And then I think I got her to teach, if memory serves me well. That's what ends up with a lot of people who used to come to my classes, and they stick them out, and then they become these powerful people. And then I bring them in because it was an organic school, Oval House Music School, and I created it, and thanks to Roz and Alfie Pritchard, who I talked about earlier, where I did my first workshop. So Shawnette Jones lives in a community in Cardiff. She started a tradition, a culture whereby they paint on a wall on a particular street in this community in Wales. They do beautiful paint. They paint words, flowers, images that pertain to, how they want to feel about themselves, things that inspire transformation and make society, the world, their community, their families feel better about being alive in the world today. So the first time she ever painted something of mine was before COVID. She painted a quote of mine alongside a quote of the great Rumi, and I cried. I was so touched. I'd never seen anybody do that for me or about me, and there was I in public in this community. Much later comes COVID-19. Her community goes through some stress and angst. The people are clearly stressed by this distressing situation of having to find ways of coping with life under COVID-19. The next thing she paints of mine is a poem from my daily coronavirus daily poems. And my poem inspires people about love and empathy and selflessness and what have you, compassion. She asks permission, or she tells me, that she's painted my pink. She sends me a private message with a picture of the poem, and I wept. I couldn't believe it. And literally, my poem began to inspire people. So there you have it, to actually feel better about themselves. So art made change, contrary to that naughty, condescending, arrogant, up its own, whatever you may call it, English vibe, where people think that art, can't change, and they pretend, like artists say, "Oh, I know my art doesn't." Me, art changes because art is change. Change is art. You can't separate them. So don't even be poncy and pretend to be nice and selfless and whatever, all the liberal stuff. I don't mean you, Francisco, but that those people who think like that, they shouldn't be like that, because art is change. Change is art, period. It's the same thing where we come from. So my art was transforming people. And then the next time she painted yet another one, I'm forgetting which one. That was recently, just, not so long ago. So that's one of the P's in this pod of memory. Twin P. The second one then, which is just phenomenal, which is ongoing, is a white South African woman called Estelle Kokot, and she's available on Facebook. We have not met physically. We've only got as far as Zoom or whatever chat, one of those chats. I can't remember whether it was Skype or whatever, where we saw each other's faces, like you and I are looking at each other, but you and I know each other physically. We've crushed each other. We've played music. We've been in the same room for hours and stuff. She and I don't know each other like that, but we connected, and she was responding to my poetry. One of the first ones, at lavender, or something about blossoms, about flowers coming through the crack in my door, during COVID, during, lockdown. And she started composing music she's a jazz singer from South Africa, a woman of Afrikaans ancestry, whose relatives, and she's being inspired by the closeness she's feeling from me and the inspiration, and she won't mind me saying this openly, she is opening up about her background. Some of her relatives were actually in cahoots with the very regime that oppressed us. She herself is on the other extreme of them, 180 degrees. She's one of the most progressive people on the planet. You understand me? She performs with Black people. She's had all kinds of, interactions and relationships. And I'm not, it's not like, oh, well, I know some Black people, or I'm not anti-Semitic. Some of my best friends are Jewish. I'm not coming at it like that. She is actively a phenomenally gifted person who's been creating jazz for years, for decades, with all kinds of people in South Africa and in different parts of the world. She lives in North London, you know, Finsbury Park, I think it is, and she's a singer and songwriter, and she is writing music to my poems, my everyday coronavirus, you know, lockdown poems. And we have got more than an album's worth of material already. So that is going to become an album. That is my greatest one-to-one collaboration, you know, ever, in terms of one-to-one, not groups, you know. It's just like on another level, and it's digging deep, and tears are flowing and what have you, you know. So that is not out yet, but that's going to lead to something, you know. I don't know if that is good enough, or if you want me to go deep.
It's nice to hear, because I mean, one of the things because I'd read your poems every day, but I stop myself half the time from responding, because otherwise I wouldn't do anything else, because it would become you're very naughty, because you know you would stop me from working and from doing the things I need to do.
Oh, you know.
So I hold back.
But Francisco, thank you. Now you've just inspired me and reminded me now. Now you've pushed me. So let me give you the heaviest of all of the stories. Please, man. Oh, my brother. Thank you. So yeah, you know, you're saying like my work, blah, blah, was transforming. What has, you know, what did I do that has led on and become something else, and people have taken and what have you. So thank you. Again, it's another duo. It's another like a two-piece in a pod story. So when Nigel Osborne, the man I share a birthday with, who I think is a year or two older than myself, but we both were born on the 23rd of June, you know. Nigel Osborne is a great workshop leader, and he and I were at one point the two top workshop leaders in terms of our fame in the UK, through the London Sinfonietta, you know. So Nigel, when he went to Bosnia and was working there, started in Sarajevo, then ended up in Mostar. When he was working with people, you know, who had suffered war trauma, there was a young guy, there was a young man that he met called Orha, you know, Orhan Mashlo, who at 13 going on 14 was the youngest soldier, Bosniak, you know, a Muslim soldier on the front line, you know, the youngest. And he had lost, he had become mute, you know, he'd lost his capacity to speak as part of the trauma, you know. And Nigel recommended me very strongly as someone that that David Wilson, the co-founder of War Child, the British charity War Child, who was the first director of the Pavarotti Music Center in Mostar in Bosnia. And you know, I worked there for 2 years. But before I went there, the man who was instrumental in them employing me as director of music development was Nigel Osborne. When I landed there, the first person that I met who became my apprentice is very Orha, we used to call him, you know. He's in that video where I'm drumming at Pavarotti Center, he's the tall guy, and then I give him the drum, and then we chant Orha, whatever. And he ended up becoming one of the top percussionists in the former Yugoslavia, in the Balkans, through myself. I took him on, and we did healing drumming, you know, privately and publicly within a group, like you saw in that video, but also privately. He would come to where I was staying, and we'd have these sessions, you know. And he went on to become the director of the rock school in the Pavarotti Music Center in the building, as a direct consequence, as a direct result of me having taken him on first. His first djembe was mine that I gave him. I gave him body to body. He was sitting in the audience at some theater, communal theater, and I was asked to play for them. And he was like this, he was always biting his nails, and then his knees shaking. You could see all the signs of trauma. I brought him to just fast forward quickly, I brought him to the UK in 2003 or whatever, when we formed when Ezra and I formed the charity Umoya Creations, and I brought him and Attila to come and do workshops in the UK. I took them to the Purcell School and we performed, together, and they came to my home. And I remember one time driving him. We were going to the studio to record an album, the same studio where we recorded with Beggy, and his knees touched the cubby hole, the glove compartment of my car, and he just screamed. And it was because there was still shrapnel in his knees, from the war, So he was a quite delicate guy. But anyway, he's ended up he was one of the top drummers there, top percussionist. I gave him my djembe. I wore it and I stood him up. I got him to stand up from the audience and I called him forward. And then I pressed the djembe from my belly onto his. And then I took the straps, from my shoulders and neck and tied them, put them over his head. And then I took his seat and gave him, the djembe. Having started playing my djembe together, before I got him up, he'd have his two hands and my two hands, Anyway, so that's Oha. The other guy is Teo. Teo, as a teenager, witnessed Croat soldiers coming to his house. He and his young brother were sitting on the step of their house. And these fascistic guys walked in armed to the teeth. And they asked the boys where their dad was. And they were very scared, and they pointed upstairs and said, upstairs, And the two soldiers went upstairs. And the next thing, the boys could hear the guns go off. They cut his father's, genitals, fed him, and they blew his head off. And the mother lost it instantly, And Teo became mute. I used to work with Teo. He would come, and I would do chanting and drumming with him. And gradually he became better. And I worked with the wife, Anne Ayla, who did acupuncture and who was a ballet teacher and did yoga and meditation. And together we worked on him and brought him out of that situation. And we ended up with Teo and I privately. He'd come to visit me in my room. We'd go to where the piano was. We'd drum for ages in the early hours of the morning. And eventually when, things got back and his speech came back and, he was more composed, he started teaching me his language and I taught him Zulu, So, yeah. So those are stories. And now he plays music. He's a top folk musician, travels around and is, happy.
As you say, arts, creativity is healing. It's connected. It's part and parcel of the same circle. From your background, from your experience, from your life, and having come from South Africa and having lived through the apartheid regimes of South Africa, and then coming here, and as you said, your first experience was to experience the racism in the UK. Mm-hmm. Can you, in times of COVID and the resurgence of Black Lives Matters and the need to be creative in our activism,
yes,
to be able to both heal and push those negative forces where they won't come back. But how do you see the way forward? How do we deal with these issues? Because although the issues are the same in a lot of ways, the access to the knowledge of these issues is very different, because we have, we, like you were saying, when you put a poem up, it goes around the globe very quickly. And in the same way, we learn we learn about these things that are going on consistently, a lot quicker, and a lot more people learn. But because of that, the reactions are both left and right, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's a that's quite a straightforward but simultaneously complex question, and I'll tell you why. Because life is multifaceted and multi-stranded in some ways, especially in the West, where things are so compartmentalized, as I keep repeating. The one gift that we who come from the parts of the world that you and I come from, what some people like to call the global South, life is much more about community. The sense of community is much more real, you know, is much more actual. So that even now, as you say, you know, I write a poem, before I know it, someone in China or Japan, you know, or the States, you know, wherever, is reading it, you know, and responding to me and making me feel good. However, that sense of community, the social media community, or whatever you call it, you know, the internet, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, that community, you know, for me, is good and bad at the same time, you know? Yeah, I can, right now, in fact, and I need to rope you in about to this at some point, I might have mentioned it to you. I'm in the process of completing a song that I titled Anthem for a New World, and it's relevant to this. And it came about as a response to George Floyd's murder the other day, you know? But just hold that thought before that. So yeah, and that's going to be an internet, an online live, no, not live, but an online piece that will involve a brass band that, in fact, has some resonances with Liverpool. A friend of mine called Ian Brownbill, you know, who worked with Jude Kelly, you know, under her organization Metal, is a brass band player, and he comes from a family of miners, you know, generations of, you know, mine workers. He's a working class English guy and a very politically sorted guy, you know, who supported our struggle, you know, during apartheid. So he in fact inspired the idea, and I'll come back to that. Please remind me if I forget, but bring me back to him, because I wanted to start elsewhere. But it also involves the Purcell School, where Alison Cox, who's the head of composition, is a friend of mine who brought me into the Commonwealth Resounds, you know, this Commonwealth organization that brings all those countries together that are involved, that are Commonwealth countries, you know, as the name goes, and you know the story of that, you know, and it might involve the Guildhall School of Music and Trinity Laban and so forth, you know, this anthem for a new world. But park that thought for a while. So when I'm saying that it's a difficult question for me, is because there are parts of the whole reaction, and it is a reaction, you know, to COVID. I do not like this notion, which is very much a Western notion, and I'm always talking to my wife Azra about it. About, you know, you don't find it in the dictionary in the sense that I'm going to use it, but reactivism. You know, we have activism, yeah. And activism is, as the word say, we act. You know, action, you know, is an active thing. You are doing. It's a doism. You know, when we are reactive, we wait for something to happen first, and then we react to it. The implication being, if I can give you the image to visualize, that we are all sitting in stasis, maybe, and very likely I could put my head on the block and I won't be, you know, I won't have the guillotine come down, because I think I'll be 100% right. We are sitting, we are urban, and we are holding a smartphone. Very stupidly called thing, but a smartphone. And we wait for the news. We react to Trayvon, you know, Trayvon Martin, if I'm remembering his name correctly. We react to the fact that on this day, it's the birthday of Martin Luther King. We react on the 12th of September to the fact that someone has reminded us online that that's the day in 1977 that Steve Biko was assassinated. You know, we are reactors, if you get my meaning. Yeah. You know, so we act less, but we react more. So here's a little simple story that is about COVID-19, right at my doorstep, literally. You know that I live on Ivory Road. You've been to my place. The rest of Ivory Road is occupied by white middle-class people, mostly. There's a black family at number 31, you know, the Rumbles, you know, but it's us. And then diagonally across the road from me, a little up, there's Charlie Fowler with his beautiful girlfriend, Katya, his Russian girlfriend. They are the nicest white folks I'm just being very literal in terms of, so-called white. That's they're of a European ancestry, But otherwise, we, the black family, I'm known, people know me because I'm just like that. The people's kids used to end up in my place, and Beggy was there, and Anthony Tidd. We'd be playing guitars, drums, and piano when I had my piano here, And the way we used to get away with being tolerated for making noise is that people couldn't complain because their own children were being, looked after by us. You know what I'm saying? We were like their nannies or whatever you call them. We were looking after the kids anyway. And when COVID hit, a woman on the top of my street, near the church, started a group on Facebook and then echoed it onto WhatsApp. It was a group that included our street and a street just adjacent to our street, And the group was called after the names of our roads, our streets, on Facebook, and then it migrated onto WhatsApp. I'm no longer a member of the group, and this is why, because all these people will meet you on the street. They won't give you, don't even talk about a second glance. You won't get a first glance. Mostly when I'm walking on the street in my area with my dreadlocks and my skin tone, several meters from me, I look up because I like to look at the sky. I will see that there's a white woman of whatever age walking on the pavement on my side, same side of the road as I'm walking on. And then she'll lift her head from her smartphone just so that she doesn't bump into the tree. And then she recognizes that there's a black man coming. It's a bit like these videos that have gone viral, of the white woman walking a dog and the black guy. And then she says, she phones 911 in the States. Oh, there's a black man, The woman crosses the street and goes to the other side, normally. You understand me? She's avoiding me. But before she looks, she'll just do like a theatrical little dramatic, like a, amateur dramatic little look like, as if, she just realized she's meant to be on the other side because of whatever. But the real reason is because she's avoiding encountering me because I'm a black man and I've got dreadlocks, You understand me? And the way I walk has got rhythm and a bit of style, and some vibe and groove. Now, this woman who started the group puts a request on the group page that she's with her son, her 8-year-old boy or something, and they're locked in, they're locked down. But she wishes for some pasta, and if her boy can be indulged with his Frosties or those chocolatey things, choco or whatever, the chocolatey cereal.
Yeah.
Is there anybody in the group, in our roads, who could kindly bring that to her address? And I know where she lives, up by the church. I, the black man who's normally avoided on the street, end up being the one who goes out, and I'm 70 years old. I'm in that category of vulnerable ones, Mm-hmm. I go to the South Asian owned corner shop, a little distance from where I'm living, and he's got pasta. There's no more pasta at places like Co-op and what have you, and all these people know, and they're struggling for pasta. But, I go to the shop, there's pasta and those Cocoa Pops. I buy them, the guy greets me nicely, I wish him well. And then I take the stuff to the door of the woman. And there's a little blackboard because there's a church next door and there's some notices and stuff. I tuck the shopping in a plastic bag. I tuck it behind the blackboard, and then when I get home, I then type a notification, on the chat group, both Facebook and WhatsApp, that I have got the stuff for you. You know what? A couple of days pass and there's not even an acknowledgement. I then have to write to check, because I then send my son, Shakur, to go up to check if the food has been taken. And then now I don't know whether it's been pinched, stolen, or whether they've taken it into the house. And all I need is an acknowledgement. She acknowledges only after I've written a message like, oh, yes, thank you, by the way, and that's it. So for me, COVID-19 is a time when we should actually be more Ubuntu, more I am because you are, more human than we've ever been in the West. We Africans, we are like that. You know what I mean? In some way, and then me, for my family, in lockdown, my kids are home taught. I do my yoga, I chant, I play my Udu, I cook, I make my smoothies. So we found a way to continue the harmony and the vibe, you know, and continue to have, Tulani does her Kathak, you know, I hear her teaching in her bedroom, you know, we continue to be empathetic and compassionate and sensitive, you know. But you know, other people are feeling like they can't wait to get on. That's why when things ease, you know, and then people are out in the park, and my daughter who goes and observes social distancing comes back and says, "Oh, Daddy, but you know, I saw people do this and what have you. You know, some people don't give a damn." We have to change, you know, and become more like us. I don't mean to be arrogant, but be more caring, notice, you know. So what people say is, what's the new normal going to be? For me, the new normal is the same normal. You know, I don't mean to be arrogant. I don't mean to be misunderstood. But people have to shift, those who don't actually realize that there's another way of being. So coming back then, coming to Black Lives Matter, I'm saying that one thing that I don't like is about people wait for those. I wrote a poem. I've written several poems, you know, dedicated to George Floyd. And in fact, the song that I'm talking about is inspired by him. And then I'll come back to the actual song and the brass band. We don't have to wait. I don't remember, like however many minutes it was. You know, when you count it in seconds, I'm forgetting, but so many seconds and what have you. I wrote a poem about that. We don't have to wait for those number of minutes, you know, that it took for George Floyd's breath to actually cease in order to then do something. You know, obviously all those people were there and don't get me wrong, there were incredible people, most of whom were Black. You know, and there were other people from other cultural backgrounds who did, you know, and tried to stop stuff. But the majority of us, we react, you know. And then, if let's say it wasn't, we were not in COVID, you know, and whenever it happened that George Floyd was murdered, a few weeks after, it's back to the plateau until another person, it happens to another person. That side of it, I don't like very, very much. So to which end then, coming out to the brass band, I got a message from my friend Ian Brownbill, and it's a positive thing. I'm quoting him, and it's a very positive thing. Ian Brownbill wrote to me privately, this working class man who plays the trumpet, who's part of the brass band movement from that area, from Liverpool and elsewhere, surrounding areas, and says, Eugene, we are principally white people, he and all the people who play in those bands, you know, the thing that the movement that he's part of. They're mainly white people. He says, please help us. Do a workshop, do something. I want you to interact with us. Here's the website of this. I'll introduce you to my buddy who runs this, blah, blah, blah. What can we do? You know, people feel like aimless. They want to do something, you know. Basically, not to use the word too heavily, though, but there are very beautiful people, white people, who feel guilty, who don't want to be associated with Trump and his like, and who don't want to be, you know, seen to be on the same side as those police officers who kill our people. So what is it they can do? You understand? So he's coming to a Black man like myself, who he knows for many years and knows personally, and has been involved in creative projects personally with. His father, Ian's father, was a supporter of the ANC and was just a little short of being a guerrilla himself, you know, a totally powerful man, you know, who brought his son up to think like you and I, Francisco, in terms of the struggle and freedom. So he's consulting me as to what it is that white people can do, you know. So starting with his band, and then I said, well, and that inspired me. Then I wrote the song, I wrote the piece of music for George Floyd under the auspices of Black Lives Matter. and basically concurred with Ian Brownbill that white people should start doing things affirmatively that actually show the world that their actions reflect their belief in the principles of freedom and anti-racism and anti all the horrible isms, that are thrust upon us. Only then will change, like Mahatma Gandhi, whoever said, be the change you want to see in the world, like actively do something. So this is a small gesture as artists that I'm bringing them together, and then they're going to relate to brass bands all over the world, in the States, in South Africa, in wherever people are playing brass instruments, whatever their skin tone, because only then, when they really fuse and they smell each other's sweat and they brush each other's shoulders, and when we talk, when we don't need anymore to be socially distanced, where the sputum and the spray of spit from the mouthpiece of one mixes with the other, obviously not now, because that would be very stupid and irresponsible. But you get, I'm using that metaphorically, and the same then with Alison Cox of the Commonwealth, resounds, and Purcell, the school, where mostly at the Purcell, where I was an artist in residence, for a couple of years, 2003, 5, or whenever it was, 4, most of the students are white. They come from wealthier backgrounds. So for these people, and my friend Robert Mitchell, the pianist, who was Anthony's friend in the group Quite Sane, he told me recently that he has white people who very, very lovingly and really beautifully and with authenticity are touching base with him and asking him for advice. What can we do? Because we feel like they definitely do not want to be identified as being part of the enemy, because they are not. But it's not enough just to sit. Like my daughter Tulani's placard has a phrase that is similar to what Steve Biko said, which I'm paraphrasing. If in times of injustice, you are neutral, you are actually siding with the oppressor or whatever, Steve Biko said, if you sit on the fence, you will hurt your genitals. You've got to take sides. So now these people are saying they want to take sides with the people who are freedom fighters, and that's the only way we will have change.
I was actually chatting to, Pax Nindi,
Yeah.
And I was chatting about that, and he was the same with him. He said, we've been watching, we've been seeing this is not today. Floyd George is not of now. There's been many Floyd Georges, and you can't, you have to be the change that you want to see. It's that very much the poem that I wrote, which touches on things like that. I mean, one of the things it touches on, which is quite interesting, is what you spoke about at the beginning, about the fruit and the mango, and in the middle when you talked about fish and chips, very much about the concept of, the poem talks about what would they do, and they being Europe and European, what would they do without what we have given them? And it's it's relating to those things, anything from the culture, but also imagine if you took all the food, all the products, all the things away from here. What would you do without what we have given you? And it's that context.
Yeah.
It's very much about the way you're speaking. It's that relationship with life, and the relationship with, from my point of view, Pachamama, Mother Earth, and yes. How and we are that connection, and what you were talking about with Ubuntu and all those things, because it's very much that, isn't it? It's my normal, our normal is what we will carry on being. It's the normal of other people.
Yes.
And other concepts that need to change and become more about us and about how we are, because we are custodians, and that's all we are. So finally, you've been writing a poem a day as part of that continuation of creation, of creativity within these complicated times. How do you see, where do what's your next project? What would you like your next project to be when we can, as you say, hold each other, be close to each other, become part again of that context, which gives us the food for thought and food to continue.
Actually, my next project, thank you for that beautiful question, for us running it off like this, Francisco. The next project has actually been decided for me already. Like I haven't been needing to, sit down, with my cup of tea and think, assiduously, as to what shall I do next now when this is finished, So, because it's a continuum, because everything that I've done and everything that I continue to do and everything that I shall always do is determined by the reality of my life. I've never ever actually, thanks for the question, because I've never really had to think about it like this. I've never ever had to sit down and think, well, now what shall I do next? And this is what led me to have a phrase in a chapter of the book that I'm writing, that's part of my memoir, writing about my methodology, that was inspired by me being asked for many years by people who knew my work, and liked my work, as to where can we, like there wasn't a library, there wasn't a bookshelf they could go to, a bookshop or anywhere. There wasn't anywhere online where they could buy a book that is Eugene Skeef's method, if you like, So people started really harassing me and hounding me for this, And after many years of ignoring it, I realized that, hey, even though I don't really want to write this kind of book, and because I just do what I do, I can write it actually and tell the story, So I've started writing it, and in this one chapter, I start when I'm describing my approach to running a workshop, and you know this because we've done it together, and you are like that. I say, I am very prepared because I don't prepare. And what I mean by that is that, when, say, Gillian Moore, the head of music at the Royal Festival Hall at South Bank Centre in London, asks me to come and do a workshop with teachers on a particular day in this room at the Royal Festival Hall, she will ask me maybe 3 weeks in advance, 2 weeks in advance, and sometimes, as is quite often the case, maybe just a few days before, because suddenly something's happened. It's Mandela's birthday, and they would like to have a different kind of input, not just the reading of a book or the showing of a film, or the playing of music. So, Eugene, can you bring us something, So I know that I'm going to be doing a particular kind of thing, but I can't stress about it, because on the day at 11 o'clock a.m. in, the Lyre Room or whatever, I'm going to be meeting 30 teachers or 25 artists or whatever, and I have to do this thing with them. If I prepare too much, I write a whole thesis of what I'm going to do, and at minute such and such, I'm going to do this, like a classical composition, a symphony. I come on the day, there's been a thunderstorm, there's a leak in the roof, the furniture, has been moved, people have come, they're sniffing, they're blowing their noses, they can't find the basket to throw away their smelly tissues. I have to deal with that. That's the reality that I come to. That is the now of then, you know what I'm saying? So here's an example. This happened, I remember even as I was just describing the scene, that actually I have a real thing that happened. And Pax might even know this, Pax Nindi, who you mentioned. Because Denise Melian, our friend Denise Melian, who managed the project, Ngoma, to South Africa. Straight after that project, I don't know if you know, Denise got more famous. And then she ended up getting the job as the, whatever her position was, she was the director of something, running London Arts Board in London, which was an offshoot of the Arts Council of England, as was called then. And Denise Melian invited me once to come and do a workshop for the carnival people, all the carnival groups and what have you, in central London, somewhere near Covent Garden. And the workshop was going to start at a particular time, and there were going to be this many people. And the room was going to be cleared. The space was going to be made available to me. You know what happened? When I got there, the room hadn't been cleared. There were those whiteboards, there were chairs, tables, desks. It was just a whole lot of furniture in the space with very little room for movement. And I had been promised a space. And in fact, that's the story that I tell in my chapter. I just remembered. I'd been promised a space where there would be just a parquet floor and no furniture in the room, because I was going to organize a circle and we were going to be moving around, getting crazy, my workshops. But rather than complain, I just remembered that when we were children, the working men, the road diggers, the people who laid the electric pipes and put up the telegraph poles, the workmen of South Africa, the working class men, used to have chants, songs that they created and chants that were rhythmic, that made the work, like if they were pickaxing, if they were digging, a trench, with pickaxes. If they were in time, if they were doing it to the same rhythm, there was less chance of them, of them digging the axe, the pickaxe into their neighbor's foot or something, or hitting their head or something like that, So I just remembered, and one of the chants was Kula Zasha, Zasha Kula Zasha, Abelung go dem, Abelung go dem, and those chants, The second one is damning, is cursing the white man because they call us Jim. Jim. They just give us whatever name, So it was a political chant, but to make the work easy. So I got all the teachers, the carnival group members, to pick up a chair or table in that rhythm, and we piled them all on one end of the room, and we had an incredible workshop,
Well, it's funny because you said, you can't prepare for that. And I'd like to turn it on its head, really, because, you mentioned the statement, the thing, be the change you want to be.
Yes.
And to be the change you want to be, you always have to be prepared.
Yeah.
And you spend your whole life, you just preparing for every moment.
That's exactly the natural place that I would go. Exactly. So I'm going to be back in the community. I'm going to be doing workshops. I know that people will be, people are asking me now, so all the things I'm doing online will go back, to the so-called normal, however it's going to be. But one thing that will continue to be normal is exactly what you said, because I'm the same person. And as you say, thank you, man, you just gave me the cherry on the cake. I've been preparing all my life. So I'm prepared, and I'll be continuing to do what I've been doing all my life, which is connecting with people, really, connecting with humanity.
Eugene, thank you so much for a wonderful, wow. I think we could carry on all day, really, and we will. I'm hoping to see you very soon.
Thank you,
when all these crazy things stop, and when we can actually see each other in real life, and maybe even plan or unplan something.
Yeah. Thank you, my brother. Thank you, Francisco. No one better to speak to than you, my brother. You make it so easy. It's like drinking water. Thank you. Thank you.